The wind howled across the Montana Territory like the cry of a wounded animal, carrying with it the bite of December frost that could steal a man's breath in seconds. Snow fell in thick, relentless sheets, blanketing the rough trail that wound between towering pines and jagged rocks. It was the kind of weather that drove even the hardiest settlers indoors, huddled around their fires, praying for spring. But Ayanna wasn't seeking shelter. He moved through the white wilderness like a shadow, his moccasined feet finding purchase on surfaces that would send others tumbling into the abyss below. His weathered face, marked by years of sun and sorrow, remained impassive as he navigated the treacherous path. The thick buffalo hide wrapped around his shoulders did little to ward off the cold. But he had learned long ago that survival wasn't about comfort, it was about endurance. He paused, his dark eyes scanning the landscape ahead. Something was wrong. The silence was too complete, too heavy. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. That's when he saw her, a crumpled figure in the snow, barely visible against the white expanse. At first, he thought it might be a wounded deer or perhaps discarded belongings from a wagon train. But as he approached, his heart clenched with recognition of something far more precious and fragile. A woman, young, perhaps no more than 20, with golden hair that had escaped from beneath a worn wool shawl. Her face was pale as the snow around her, lips tinged blue with cold. But it was the gentle curve of her belly beneath her thin coat that made Ayanna's breath catch in his throat. She was with child, very much with child. He dropped to his knees beside her, his calloused hands moving with surprising gentleness as he checked for signs of life. Her pulse was weak, but steady, her breathing shallow. She was alive, but barely. How long had she been lying here? Minutes? Hours? Questions flooded his mind. Where had she come from? Where was her husband? What was a pregnant woman doing alone in this God-forsaken wilderness? But Ayanna had learned that questions were luxuries he couldn't afford. Action was what mattered now. Without hesitation, he gathered her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt despite her condition. Her body was cold, so cold, but he could feel the faint flutter of life within her. 2 lives hung in the balance, and he was their only hope. "Easy now," he murmured, though she couldn't hear him. The words were as much for himself as for her. "I've got you." He pressed her against his chest, sharing his body heat as he began the careful journey back to his shelter. Each step was calculated, deliberate. The wind whipped around them, trying to tear her from his grasp, but Ayanna held firm. He had failed to protect those he loved before. He would not fail again. The woman stirred slightly in his arms, a soft moan escaping her lips. Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. Even unconscious, her hand moved instinctively to her belly, a mother's protective gesture that struck Ayanna like a physical blow. "Your baby's safe," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if it was true. "You're both safe now." As they disappeared into the swirling snow, neither of them could have imagined how those words would change everything. In a world where trust was earned through blood and betrayal lurked behind every kind gesture, Ayanna had made a choice that would test everything he believed about mercy, redemption, and the possibility of second chances. The storm raged on, but for the first time in years, the Apache warrior wasn't walking alone. The small cabin nestled against the mountainside looked more like a cave than a home, its rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss to keep out the worst of the wind. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and drying herbs. Ayanna had built this place with his own hands after everything had fallen apart. It wasn't much, but it was shelter, and right now, shelter meant the difference between life and death. He laid the woman on his simple bed, the only piece of furniture in the sparse room besides a rough table and 2 chairs. Her breathing was still shallow, but some color had returned to her cheeks. The warmth from the stone fireplace was working its magic, coaxing life back into her frozen limbs. Ayana moved with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire until it roared with life, then hanging a pot of snow over the flames to melt. He would need warm water, clean cloths, and whatever herbal remedies he could manage. His grandmother had taught him the healing ways before the soldiers came, before his world shattered like ice in spring. The woman's eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused. They were the color of summer sky, a startling blue that seemed out of place in this harsh landscape. She tried to sit up, but Ayana was beside her in an instant, his hand gentle but firm on her shoulder. "Don't move," he said quietly. "You're safe, but you need to rest." She stared at him with a mixture of fear and gratitude, her gaze taking in his bronze skin, his long black hair tied back with leather, the traditional beadwork on his buckskin shirt. He could see the moment recognition dawned. She knew what he was, and he could read the conflicting emotions playing across her face. You're Apache," she whispered, her voice hoarse from cold and exhaustion. Ayana nodded, unsurprised by her reaction. He had grown accustomed to that look, the mixture of fear, curiosity, and barely concealed prejudice that most white settlers wore when they encountered him. "My name is Ayana. What's yours?" She hesitated, her hand moving protectively to her belly. "Sarah," she said finally. "Sarah Coleman. Well, Sarah Coleman, you nearly died out there. What were you doing alone in a blizzard?" The simple question seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Tears welled in her eyes, and she turned her face away. I can't. Please. I just need to get to town. To Millfield." Ayana sat back on his heels, studying her carefully. Millfield was 2 days' hard ride in good weather, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. But it wasn't the distance that concerned him. It was the way she had said it, like a drowning woman grasping for a rope that might not hold her weight. "Millfield's a hard place," he said quietly, "especially for someone in your condition. You have family there." The tears came then, silent and steady. She pressed her hands to her face, her shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. Ayana felt something twist in his chest, a familiar ache he had thought buried with his wife and child. "I don't have anyone," Sarah whispered. I hoped, but there's nowhere else to go." The admission hung between them like smoke from the fire. Ayana understood desperation. He had lived with it as a constant companion for years. He also understood the particular kind of desperation that came with carrying new life in a world that seemed determined to snuff it out. "The baby's not due for some time yet," he observed, noting the size of her belly. 2 months, maybe 3, she confirmed, wiping her eyes. "I know what you must think of me. A woman alone, with child, no wedding ring." She held up her bare left hand. "But I'm not what people assume. There was someone, but You don't owe me explanations," Ayana said firmly. "Rest is what you need now. Food, warmth, safety. Everything else can wait." But even as he spoke, he could see the weight of judgment she carried, the shame that seemed to press down on her like the snow outside. He recognized it because he carried his own burdens, different sins perhaps, but equally heavy. Over the next 3 days, as the storm raged with relentless fury, they settled into an uneasy routine. Ayana tended to her needs with careful respect, never overstepping, never asking too many questions. He prepared simple meals of venison and wild roots, brewed healing teas from dried herbs, and maintained the fire that kept them both alive. Sarah, for her part, watched him with growing wonder. She had been raised on stories of savage Indians, bloodthirsty warriors who showed no mercy. But this man, this Apache who had saved her life, was nothing like those tales. He was quiet, thoughtful, and incredibly gentle, especially when her pregnancy discomfort flared up. On the 3rd night, as wind howled around the cabin like a living thing, Sarah finally broke the careful silence they had maintained. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice soft in the firelight. "Your people and mine, we're not exactly friends." Ayana was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, His voice carried the weight of old grief. "I had a wife once, and a child." He stared into the flames, seeing ghosts in the dancing light. "I couldn't save them. Maybe I can save you." The simple honesty of his words broke something open in Sarah's chest. Here, in this tiny cabin, with snow piling against the windows and the world held at bay, she felt safer than she had in months. Not just physically safe, but seen, understood. Neither of them knew that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one waiting for them in Millfield, where old prejudices ran deeper than mountain roots, and some secrets were too dangerous to keep buried. By the 5th day, the blizzard had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a world transformed. Snow lay in drifts higher than a man's head, sculpted by wind into fantastic shapes that gleamed like crystal in the pale morning sun. The silence was profound, not the ominous quiet that had preceded the storm, but the peaceful hush of a world at rest. Sarah stood at the cabin's single window, marveling at the beauty outside. Her strength had returned, along with some much-needed weight. Ayana's careful attention and nourishing meals had worked wonders, but it was more than physical healing that had taken place in this tiny sanctuary. "It's beautiful," she murmured, her breath fogging the glass. Ayana joined her at the window, his presence solid and comforting beside her. "My grandmother used to say that winter was the earth's way of dreaming. Everything sleeping, gathering strength for what comes next. What comes next for us?" The question slipped out before Sarah could stop it, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I mean, for me. What comes next for me?" But Ayana had heard what she really meant, and something in his dark eyes softened. Over the past few days, as they had shared meals and quiet conversations, something had grown between them. Fragile as new ice, but undeniably real. "The trail to Millfield will be passable in a day or two," he said carefully. "If that's still where you want to go." The doubt in his voice mirrored her own. Millfield had seemed like salvation when she was desperate and alone, but now she wasn't sure what awaited her there. She had no money, no family, no prospects, except the kindness of strangers who might not prove kind at all. "Tell me about your wife," she said suddenly, turning from the window to face him fully. "What was she like?" Ayana's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. Ayana. Her name was the same as mine. In our language it means eternal blossom. She was bright, like sunlight on water. She saw good in everything, even in me when I couldn't see it in myself. "How did you lose her?" The words came out harsh, torn from some deep place. "Soldiers came to our village, said we were harboring renegades, that we had to move to the reservation. Ayana was with child, our first. The journey—" He stopped, his hands clenching into fists. "She never made it to the reservation. Neither did the baby." Sarah's heart clenched with sympathetic pain. She reached out instinctively, covering his scarred hand with her smaller, pale one. The touch seemed to anchor him, pulling him back from whatever dark place his memories had taken him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I can't imagine that loss. For years, I blamed myself, blamed everyone. I came up here to die, I think, just fade away like smoke." He looked down at their joined hands, his thumb tracing gently over her knuckles. "But then you appeared in the snow, and I remembered what it felt like to protect something precious." The admission hung between them, heavy with possibility and pain. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were something more complex, more dangerous. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "about the baby's father." Ayana went very still, but he didn't pull his hand away. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. You've been nothing but honest with me. You deserve the same." She took a shaky breath, steeling herself. "His name was Thomas Brennan. He owned the ranch where I worked as a cook. He was charming at first, kind. He said he loved me, promised we'd be married." The bitterness in her voice told Ayana everything he needed to know about how that story ended. "When I told him about the baby, Everything changed. He said terrible things, that I had trapped him, that the child wasn't his, that I was just a scheming girl looking for a rich husband. Sarah's voice broke slightly. He gave me $50 and told me to take care of the problem. When I refused, he had me dismissed, put word out that I was a thief, that I couldn't be trusted. And you've been running ever since, trying to. I heard there might be work in Millfield, maybe people who wouldn't ask too many questions, but now, she gestured helplessly, now I don't know what I was thinking. Who's going to hire a pregnant woman with no references? Ayana was quiet for a long moment, his mind working through possibilities. Finally he spoke, his voice careful and measured. There's another choice, he said. You could stay here until the baby comes at least, maybe longer. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Ayana, I can't ask you to. You're not asking, I'm offering. He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes intense. I know it's not conventional, I know people would talk, but this place, it's peaceful, safe, and maybe... He paused, vulnerability flickering across his strong features. Maybe we could build something good here, something that honors what we've both lost, while creating something new. The offer was so unexpected, so generous that Sarah felt overwhelmed. Here was a man who had every reason to distrust her kind, yet he was offering not just shelter, but a chance at a real life. A chance to raise her child somewhere safe, with someone who understood loss and chose hope anyway. What about when people find out? She asked, voicing her deepest fear. A white woman and an Apache man. They won't understand. They won't accept it. Ayana's smile was sad but determined. Let them talk. Up here we make our own rules. The only opinions that matter are ours. Outside, the wind picked up again, sending snow swirling across the pristine landscape. Inside the cabin, two wounded souls looked at each other and saw possibility, fragile and frightening, but real as the fire that warmed them both. Sarah placed her free hand on her belly, feeling the flutter of life within. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't built on desperation and shame. A future where her child could grow up surrounded by love instead of judgment, where strength was measured not by convention, but by the courage to choose compassion over hate. Yes, she whispered, the word carrying the weight of a prayer. Yes, I'll stay. Neither of them could have predicted how quickly their careful peace would be shattered, or how the test of their newfound bond would come not from the harsh wilderness, but from the civilized world they thought they had left behind. Spring came early that year, arriving with a rush of melting snow and the sound of running water that sang through the mountains like a celebration. Sarah's belly had grown round and full, and the baby moved constantly now, as if eager to join the world being reborn around them. She stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching Ayana work in the small garden he had carved from the rocky soil. His movements were sure and economical as he planted the seeds they would need for the coming year. Corn, beans, squash. The same crops his people had grown for generations, he had told her, passed down through his grandmother's line. Their life had settled into a rhythm as natural as the changing seasons. Ayana hunted and fished, tended the garden, and prepared for the baby's arrival with the same quiet intensity he brought to everything. Sarah kept house, cooked and mended their clothes, finding peace in the simple domestic tasks that had once felt like drudgery. But more than that, they had found something neither had expected, a deep, abiding love that transcended the boundaries their different worlds had tried to impose. They talked for hours by the fire, sharing stories, dreams and fears. Ayana taught her words in Apache, his face lighting up when she struggled through the unfamiliar sounds. Sarah read to him from the few books she had salvaged from her old life, her voice bringing to life adventures and romances that seemed pale compared to their own impossible story. It was a Tuesday morning in late April when their carefully constructed peace shattered like glass against stone. Sarah was hanging laundry on the line Ayana had strung between two pine trees when she heard the sound that made her blood run cold. Horses' hooves on the rocky trail, moving fast and with purpose, multiple riders pushing their mounts hard up the steep path to their sanctuary. "Ayana!" she called, but he was already moving, appearing at her side with the fluid grace that never failed to amaze her. "Get inside," he said quietly, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle that was never far from his reach. "Lock the door." "No." Sarah's chin lifted with stubborn determination. "Whatever this is, we face it together." Before Ayana could argue, the riders burst into the clearing. 6 men on sweating horses, their faces hard with purpose and prejudice. At their head rode a man Sarah recognized with a sick lurch of her stomach. Thomas Brennan, his handsome features twisted with rage and something that might have been fear. Behind him rode Sheriff Porter from Millfield, a decent man caught between duty and his own conscience. The other 4 were clearly hired guns, their hands resting casually on their weapons as they surveyed the scene before them. "Well, well," Thomas said, his voice dripping with false charm. "If it isn't my runaway cook. Sarah, darling, you've led us quite a chase." "I don't know what you want, Thomas," Sarah said, proud that her voice remained steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I made it clear I wanted nothing from you." "Oh, but you took something that belongs to me." His eyes dropped pointedly to her swollen belly. "My child." The lie hit like a physical blow, but it was Ayana who spoke, his voice deadly quiet. "The lady asked you to leave. I suggest you honor that request." Thomas's laugh was harsh and ugly. "The lady? Is that what we're calling squaw lovers now?" His gaze raked over Sarah with deliberate insult. "Though I suppose when you're desperate enough to spread your legs for a savage, lady might be too generous a term." Ayana moved like lightning, but Sarah caught his arm, knowing that violence would only give Thomas what he wanted, an excuse to unleash the men behind him. "Careful, Indian," Thomas continued, emboldened by Ayana's restraint. "Sheriff Porter here has a warrant for your arrest. Kidnapping, they call it, taking a white woman against her will." "That's a lie." Sarah stepped forward, her protective instincts overriding her fear. "I came here willingly. I stayed willingly. This man saved my life." "Did he?" Thomas's voice took on a tone of mock concern. "Or did he find a desperate woman and take advantage? After all, who would believe the word of a pregnant whore over an upstanding member of the community?" The casual cruelty of his words, the way he reduced their love to something sordid and shameful, ignited a fury in Sarah that surprised even her. "You want to know the truth, Sheriff Porter?" she said, turning to address the lawman directly. "Thomas Brennan is a coward and a liar. He seduced me with promises of marriage, then threw me away when I became inconvenient. This man," she gestured to Ayana, "found me dying in the snow and nursed me back to health. He asked for nothing in return, expected nothing. He gave me hope when I had none." Sheriff Porter shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. He was a fair man, but he was also a practical one. The politics of his position required careful navigation, especially when it came to matters of race and propriety. "Ma'am, that may be so," he said carefully, "but the fact remains, you're a white woman living unmarried with an Indian man. That's problematic." "Problematic for whom?" Ayana's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "We harm no one. We live in peace." "You live in sin," Thomas snapped, "and you're raising my child in that sin." "It's not your child," Sarah said fiercely. "You made that clear when you called me a liar and a whore. You wanted nothing to do with this baby." "I've reconsidered," Thomas replied smoothly. "A man has responsibilities after all. I'm prepared to do right by you, Sarah. Marry you. Give the child my name. All you have to do is come home where you belong." The offer hung in the air like poison. Sarah could see the calculation behind Thomas's eyes. This wasn't about love or responsibility. This was about control, about ensuring that his secret stayed buried and his reputation remained intact. "And if I refuse?" Thomas's smile was cold as winter steel. Then I'm afraid the sheriff will have no choice but to arrest your Indian friend here. Kidnapping is a serious charge. Could mean 20 years in prison. If he makes it to trial, of course. The threat was clear. Sarah felt the world tilt around her, all their carefully built happiness crumbling like a house built on sand. She looked at Ayana, saw the resignation in his dark eyes, and knew he would sacrifice himself without hesitation to protect her and the baby. "There's another option," she said suddenly, an idea forming with desperate clarity. "Sheriff Porter, you said the problem was that we're living in sin, unmarried. What if we weren't?" The sheriff frowned. "Mom, what if Ayana and I were married? Legally married, right here, right now. Would that change things?" Thomas's face went white with rage. "You can't marry a savage. It's not legal." "Actually," Sheriff Porter said slowly, clearly thinking through the legal implications, "if they were properly wed, the kidnapping charge wouldn't hold. She'd be his wife, free to make her own choices." Sarah turned to Ayana, her heart in her throat. "Will you marry me? Here now, in front of these witnesses." For a moment the world held its breath. Then Ayana stepped forward, taking her hands in his, and spoke in a voice that carried across the clearing like a benediction. "Sarah Coleman, I take you as my wife, before this sky, this earth, and these witnesses. I promise to protect you, to honor you, to love you, and the child you carry, as long as breath remains in my body." "And I take you, Ayana, as my husband," Sarah replied, tears streaming down her face. "I promise to stand beside you, to love you, to build a life with you that honors what we've both lost and celebrates what we've found." Sheriff Porter cleared his throat. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas's face cycled through rage, disbelief, and finally a kind of defeated fury. He had lost, and everyone present knew it. "This isn't over," he snarled, wheeling his horse around. "You think you can play house up here forever? Wait until winter comes again, when you're stuck with a screaming baby and no way to get supplies. Wait until that child grows up and realizes what its mother really is." But his words had no power now. Sarah stood tall beside her husband, her hand in his, their wedding witnessed by the mountains and the sky. She had made her choice, and for the first time in her life it felt like the right one. As the riders disappeared down the mountain trail, Ayana and Sarah turned to each other. The threat wasn't gone. Men like Thomas Brennan didn't give up easily, but they were no longer alone, no longer hiding. They were married, partners in truth, as well as love. "Are you sure about this?" Ayana asked softly, his thumb tracing over her wedding ring, a simple band he had carved from mountain ash. Sarah smiled, placing his hand on her belly, where their child now in every way that mattered, moved restlessly beneath her skin. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." High above them, an eagle circled in the clear spring air, its cry echoing off the mountain peaks like a blessing. The world below might be full of prejudice and hatred, but up here, love had found a way to triumph over fear, and sometimes in a world hungry for hope, that was enough to change everything.